Good evening, everyone. My name is Santi Lata, and I'm the Secretary of the Association of Women Lawyers. Thank you for joining us this evening for the event titled Sexual Harassment at Work and Using Social Media to Discuss It. This event is organized in collaboration with ATC School of Law and the Association of Women Lawyers, or AWL as we call ourselves. We're very privileged to have the following individuals with us. And let me introduce you to these lovely people. New Sinyu. Now, Sinyu is a practicing lawyer and he's currently with Mrs. Amir Bon, and he was admitted to the High Court of Malaya in 2011. He is the Deputy Chairperson of the Bar Council's Constitutional Law Committee and the Legal Profession Committee. He is also an elected member of the Bar Council. Sinyu has acted in numerous cases of public interest involving violations of free speech and expression under various laws, including the Communications and Multimedia Act of 1998, the Penal Code, and the Sedition Act of 1948. He has acted in many strategic litigation against public participant matters, also known as SLAP matters, and these concern defamation. The second panelist is Meera Samantha. Meera completed her master's in intellectual property and shipping law in 1986, I said that very softly, and joined the women's movement in 1995 during a short career break. In the late 90s, she was part of the initial sexual harassment team that was assisting in drafting the sexual harassment bill, and again in 2004 when it was redrafted. In 2014, Meera was responsible for initiating a baseline survey on the working conditions of male and female lawyers in Kuala Lumpur and Selangor, in particular looking into issues of discrimination and sexual harassment in the legal profession. Meera is currently the Vice President of AWL, and she conducts regular training on feminist legal strategies for pupils in chambers, law students, and others. The third panelist is Daniela Zulkifli. Danny, as we call her, is an exco member of AWL and has been with the organization for almost a decade. Outside the workplace, she focuses on her passions, which include dealing with issues relating to sexual harassment, child abuse, and sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR. Danny was part of the team that drafted the Sexual Offences Against Children Act, and since 2017, she has been part of the Joint Action Group for Gender Equality, JAG, and their drafting team for the proposed sexual harassment bill. She was the co-chairperson of the Malaysian Bar's National Young Lawyers Committee between 2015 and 2016, and was a steering committee member of the Gender Equality Initiative, a project advocating for gender equality amongst law students. In addition, we have a special guest today whom we will call Survivor A. Survivor A will later on in the session share what she has gone through as a survivor of sexual harassment. Let me start by thanking all the panelists for joining us. And the organizers would in particular like to thank you, the audience, who answered a series of questions as part of the registration process. The purpose of asking these questions was so that we would understand who you are and what you wanted to learn from this event. At this point, I would like to highlight that this is a Zoom meeting and you will have at least 3 opportunities to ask questions during this event. Now, while it may be possible for you to ask your questions verbally by unmuting yourself, we would appreciate if instead you could post your questions in the chat box so that the panelists can view the questions and decide which questions to answer. Just to also let you know, this event is happening on Facebook Live, through ATC's Facebook Live. Finally, we want to emphasize that when we talk about sexual harassment, the gender of the victim is not relevant to everything that we're going to talk about. People of all genders have faced and continue to face sexual harassment. So it's not just a woman's issue, it is a people issue. And we collectively are the people. I'm going to start this discussion by sharing the information that we gathered from you based on the feedback that you provided in the form. And I'm just going to really quickly run through this information so that you have an understanding of who is here with us today and the types of things that they were thinking about when they filled out the questionnaire. And Don't have to worry about taking screenshots and all of this stuff. We'll be sending you these slides if you're a registered participant. Let's start. So recently on the 10th of July, the Star Online published an article about Dress Sexy a Bit lah, tackling sexual harassment in Malaysia. What's interesting from this publication was the data about women who reported and women who didn't report the sexual harassment that occurred. The women who reported, 54% of them told a friend, 51% of them told a family member, and only 15% reported this to the police. In one of the comments that we received, the question was, why don't people report? Well, here's part of that answer. 54% of them feel embarrassed. 38% feel that there's nothing that's going to be done to help them. 26% are fearful of the repercussions, and 18% felt cultural, social pressure, so they rather keep that information to themselves. Let's talk about you for a minute. Of the people, and these are based on 80 responses that we received as of the 14th of July when we closed registration officially. Of the 80 responses, 56% are students and 38% are employed, and the remainder unemployed. You will see that 78% of our audience are women and 13% are male, and 7% said that they did not want to say. And here's a big question. Have you ever suffered sexual harassment at work or directly know someone who has suffered sexual harassment at work? A whopping 53.8% said yes. So based on this, the next question was, what do you think the appropriate steps would be for a victim to take when faced with an incident or incidents of sexual harassment? Surprisingly, 27.5% said make a police report. Now, this goes against the data from the Star Online article, where a very, very small percentage of people actually made police reports. The second highest data, close to that data, is the 28.7% who said lodge a complaint with the Human Resource Department. So the presumption is if you're in the workplace and you're facing sexual harassment, the first place you should go is actually to your Human Resource Department or equivalent. 20% then said that you could raise an issue with a superior, and 17% said that they would raise the issue with a family member. The other proportions are very, very small. Almost 100% of the audience today have social media accounts. And when we asked them the question of whether they thought it was appropriate for a victim to raise the issue of sexual harassment on their own social media account, 56.3% said yes. And I would like to invite Mira to speak about why 56.3% of the respondents would view social media as a positive platform to talk about a sexual harassment incident. Specifically, what are your views about this, taking into account your experience in dealing with people who have suffered sexual harassment and even those who have talked about it on social media? Mira?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, ADC, for inviting me to be a panelist. It's a privilege to be here. Before I get into the whole discussion of social media, thank you, Santi, for reminding each one of us that sexual harassment affects all persons, male, female, the LGBT community, persons with disability, they are the marginalized groups. And it cuts across race and religion. But we know that disproportionately, that as Santi has mentioned, women are affected more by sexual harassment. So sexual harassment is rooted in power imbalance, in a patriarchal structure that permeates in the private sphere and in the public sphere. When I talk about patriarchal, it is not about male and female. It's about power imbalance, because you can have between two women too. So that's a very important point to remember. So individuals who are affected, who are victims of sexual harassment, they have to deal with a variety of emotions, and they are psychologically impacted by the incident. They become paralyzed, they feel humiliated, and they fearful. So despite the grave impact on them psychologically, the paralysis, so why do survivors choose the social media platform? Why? Rather than going through the legal process internally within the organization or file a report, what pushes them or what drives them to social media? With some of the survivors that I've spoken to, there are several reasons. Some have said, well, there are no sexual harassment policies. The leaders within the organization or in the university do not take these issues seriously. Or perhaps some have said there's not sufficient redress mechanism, even if there was a policy. Or they don't trust the whole process. And if they report, there might be some repercussions on them. So basically, some have said it's the toxic culture in the organization or in the firm, or even it could be in the university. The toxic culture where survivors find it difficult to come out, to go through a redress mechanism. So it's employers who do not inculcate the zero tolerance policy pushes a lot of the survivors to look at other mediums to report. So they resort to social media for a variety of reasons. One survivor shared with me that she finds comfort. Comfort from strangers, it doesn't matter. I just want my story to be heard. It doesn't matter who hears it. I want it to be out there. And I get comfort from groups of people who have had similar incidents, and that empowers me. I find solace, I find support. And through that, I become stronger. So of course, the success of the Me Too movement has emboldened a lot of survivors to speak out through social media. I want to share with you one case where social media has had a positive impact. That is the NUS case of Monica Bay, where she took to social media to speak out on online harassment when one of her fellow students filmed her while she was showering in the university campus residence. Although Monica received backlash, and so did the perpetrator, mind you, what Monica did was extremely clever. She pushed the discussion online to discuss on how we can improve the system rather than focusing on what we should we do with the perpetrator. Because in the end, what we want is a no tolerance policy, isn't it? That's what we want. We want zero tolerance on sexual harassment. So what happened in that case is NUS suspended him for a semester, banned him from entering campus residence, and made him send Monica a letter of apology. That is what I call it had powerful impact. And then the university students got together in a town hall meeting. They spoke about the university's lack of victim support. They also spoke about the lack of communication between the university and the survivor. And as we know, recently we have had a case of MMU where the survival and sexual harassment has not been communicated at all, what through the process. So what NUS did, what happened there through Monica's online had an impact. Her online discussion had an impact to change the course in NUS. And now NUS has set up a victim support team, a unit. And that has spurred other universities in Singapore to relook at their redress mechanism. In fact, I think it's Nanyang Technological, I can never remember this, Nanyang Technological University has introduced a new anti-harassment online model. This module was drafted by the students and the lecturers together. It talks about victim support, what is sexual harassment, how you can how to deal with it when you're faced with it. So basically, it just goes to show that there is a dire need for a safe and conducive environment. So that is the positive impact. In fact, another positive impact on online harassment has recently been a case of a young survivor within the legal fraternity who spoke about it online. Of course, she received some backlash, but she somehow managed to come to seek support, assistance from AWL, and we drafted a press statement, and we lobbied, for the bar president to look into sexual harassment policies. We want it mandated in all law firms and to relook at the redress mechanism. And that was a positive impact because we pushed the bar president to come up with a statement, and so did he. So he did. And what was interesting, he also said that sexual harassment may be treated as misconduct on the proposed legal profession. So hopefully that comes out. So that is the positive impact. But as much as many victims find comfort and are empowered, we know that social media has its pitfalls, sadly. It can be a platform for where it is the judge and the jury. There can be a personal cost element to social media, as many of us can run the risk of having our whole life examined by people we have no clue who they are, or people who have no clue of the incident, what happened. And then there is a possibility that you may get threatened, you may get humiliated, friends of the perpetrator might say things to you, and you run all those risks. So these negative comments can have an impact on you online. So what happens? You have a secondary trauma, not just on the incident, and also online, the incidents online. So it's a lot to deal with for a person. And sometimes from some of the survivors that I've spoken to, they said, they didn't even inform their parents. So, and their parents get to hear about it. And my God, that's another whole ball game back, dealing with parents. As a parent itself, I know. So you have the incident, the online, and then the parents, then friends you don't know. I'm not here to scare you, but I'm trying to tell you what the reality could be if you do not act cautiously. This is the reality of it. You've got to be really cautious. My advice would be, if you go online, be careful what you say. Try not to name the perpetrator. Or try not, or perhaps don't name the perpetrator. And I would advise you to seek legal advice or go to an NGO to help you ascertain, to lay out the options and to decide what is it that you want. What exactly do I want from this incident?
Okay,
Yeah.
Mira. Thank you. So
Go
what
on.
Mira does is Mira tells you the reasons why you should and the reasons why you shouldn't. So let's take a look at that data. So while 56.3% said that it's appropriate to use social media to talk about the sexual harassment that has occurred if you are the victim, 43% said no. And when we look at the data, the 56.3% who said yes said a lot of things that Mira said. It's about creating awareness. It is about encouraging others to speak out. That is an easier platform than going through the more formal processes. Even telling your parents. And it's okay as long as the details are not shared. But Mira has also very, very nicely pointed out that there are risks. The risk of a public backlash or cyberbullying, the risk of being sued in defamation. So let's look at the rationale for the people who said no, the victim should not publish this information on social media. The four primary rationale for why they shouldn't included the risk of cyberbullying. Second, the fact that it's a private matter. Third, the risk of being sued in defamation. And fourth, and this I thought was a really good question, how does this stop the offender? Maybe to help us consider the legal perspective, can I ask Sin Yu to speak about the risks, specifically defamation, liability to the MCMC, and even the risk of cyberbullying? Perhaps you could give us some perspective on this, Sin Yu.
Hello, hi. Thanks ATC and AWL for inviting me. My name is Sin Yu. I'm the diversity candidate here, the diversity speaker here. So, yeah, this is a very current topic, and I think this is a developing area that has, in a way, taken its own momentum for the past few years, ever since the Me Too movement. But before I go into the legalese of it, I think it's important for us to consider this, and I think this is something that there is a divide between generation, not gender, but generation. Social media. I'm not suggesting anything else other than I'm being young here. For a lot of us, social media is the primary way of how we express ourselves. And I would even go so far to say that every time we feel certain emotions, we would publish it on social media before we go anywhere else. So it's hardly surprising that there is in a way, a torrent of, I wouldn't say accusations, but stories that are being told through social media about sexual harassment, about what they have all personally gone through. And like Mira said, of course, there are risks that comes along with it because we have chosen a very public way of expressing ourselves. And the entire legal regime can really be summed up in this one line. As long as it's the truth, there is nothing stopping you from expressing yourself anywhere. Social media, privately, you can even put a billboard, if you want to. But as long as it's a truth and you can prove that it's a truth, there's nothing stopping you. So this then begs the question of evidence. Because a lot of what happened in private, happened, you know, in situations where there's only the two of them, no one else. So you have to consider that even though it is the truth, even though that that is what happened and you believe that that is what happened, for you to prove to a third party that that actually happened, it may not be that simple. It may not be straightforward because of how, you know, the court process is. So that is something for you to consider. And the other thing that you need to consider is that even though you are not able to prove that it is true, it may not necessarily mean that it is false. And again, that is another fallacy of our court system, that he who asserts must prove. Maybe we are a lot of law students here, right? So that is, you know, evidence 101 for you. A lot of what there's been a lot of counter argument as to why people may find going on social media may be discouraged or distasteful, and that's really because they are worried about you know, this turning into a trial by media. And you know, we have seen cases where there have been accusations that has been made, and even before there's been any due process that has been undertaken, the damage to the accused, it's already been done. And you know, often it's irreparable because news and information about sexual harassment, it may spread very, very fast. But when it comes to the explanation from the accused, you know, it might not have the same reach or the sensation as the accusation of sexual harassment. But of course, that is something that I think society would have to live with. The danger, the only danger is when a false accusation is made. And you see a lot of cases being reported, but of course, until now, I think there's no reliable information, there's no reliable statistics as to how many real cases out there, as opposed to how many false accusation cases that are out there. So what I'm trying to say is really this, that it takes a lot for a victim to come out on social media and express themselves and subject themselves to great scrutiny. But that, because it takes a lot for them to come out, and because it's, for many, it's the only way to come out because of how we express ourselves, which brings me back to my first point. The danger that there might be a false accusation is a danger that, you know, we will all have to live with. It is not a good argument to say that simply because there might be false accusation that we should therefore silence everybody. There are adequate remedies to deal with false accusation. You know, defamation laws. There's some under the criminal laws, but you know, I disagree with that. So if you ask yourself this question, when it comes to any other crime, corruption, pedophilia, child grooming, do we have the same level of scrutiny towards the victim as compared to a case of sexual harassment? We don't. Why is it when it comes to cases of sexual harassment that suddenly the victim is under such great scrutiny? So that is something that, you know, we as a society must really ask ourselves. There are, of course, inherent risks when you choose to go public about it, like any other form of going public. You can even say in a forum, you can even tell it to friends, and you will be subject to the same risk, which is risk of being subject to defamation laws. When it comes to defamation laws, I think again this is a developing area, and what I feel is that defamation laws, it needs to be tweaked to deal with cases where the nature of the allegation is very private. So defamation laws, if you are ever subject to a defamation claim, there's really three defenses that you can rely on. The first is justification, which is truth. If what you say is true and you can prove it, then you don't have to worry. It's a complete defense. The second is privilege. Privilege simply means that you are in a position to say what you had said, and you should not be sued about it because of your position. You should not be liable because of your position, even if it's untrue. So when it comes to victims, there's a certain degree, common law recognizes a certain degree of qualified privilege. Because you are a victim, you are a complainant. And if that is accompanied by an official complaint, you would enjoy that particular degree of privilege. And even if what you say could not be entirely true, but it is substantially true, you probably would not be liable for defamation. And the third is fair comment. This is when you really have to look at the context and the content of what you had written and how you had expressed yourself. So it's really subjective. I'm not going to go into fair comment, but the important thing for you to know is that if it's true, don't worry, and you can prove it, don't worry. If you're a complainant, there is a certain degree of qualified privilege. On top of being liable for defamation, you should also be worried about Section 233 of the Communications and Multimedia Act 1998, as well as the offense of criminal defamation under the Penal Code, Section 500, I think. So with that two offenses, from a human rights perspective, those two offenses should be abolished. And when it comes to Section 233, even though it's wide as it is, and I think it's no secret how Section 233 is being used by the authorities to quell dissent, but Section 233 is not meant to be used in cases where someone find it offensive or find it distasteful against someone else's post, because it's not the legislative intent of Section 233. Section 233, without trying to go into the really minute details, it has its historical background from the UK Poster Act. I can't remember the exact act of it, but it's a 1940 act, which basically says that if you ever send, like, for example, threatening mails through the postal system and it reaches the intended target, you could be liable for an offense. So it's meant to deal with situation like that. It's meant to deal with situation like, I send a lot of mails to you, I send a lot of SMSs to you, 100 a day. It could constitute a form of harassment. It's not meant to deal with situation where, I look at your Facebook, I'm not agreeable to what you had said, I find it offensive, I find it annoying, and therefore I lodge a report. It's not meant to deal with that. But it's been used and misused quite rampantly, if I may add. And from a human rights perspective, when it comes to freedom of speech and expression, one should never be imprisoned because of what you had said. And Section 233 and the criminal defamation, it carries with it imprisonment, penalty of imprisonment, which is wrong. But law is what it is, and that's why we should always strive to be better. And of course, the last thing that I would like to say about the risk of going public about sexual harassment is that you might risk doxing. And I think Mira had covered that earlier. Doxing is basically netizens and trolls targeting you, researching every aspect about you and posting it online. And it would attract more trolls to come. We have seen a lot of that in a lot of cases where certain posts which are objectionable to a certain quarter has gone viral. Yeah, I think I've taken up enough time. Thanks.
Okay, so you got to see Sinyu, who is, by the way, not our diversity candidate. We actually invited you, Sinyu, because we actually like you. The point that Sinyu makes here is that there are things that you have to be careful about, number one. But at the same time, if you're aware of the law, that there are steps that you can take and ways in which that you can protect yourself. Okay, we'll come back to that in a bit. I'm just going to continue now with the presentation to show you where we're going next.